Are the Memphis Grizzlies stuck? That is a question that we are going to try to answer here on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Plus, we're going to talk about how Memphis cannot hold leads. They blew another one against the Pelicans, and Ja Morant trade rumors continue to run rampant. Lots of things to jump into, even without a basketball game to discuss, and maybe there will be another one that we won't be able to talk about on this edition of the show. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for being with us on this installment of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Ja Mullinax, joined by the incomparable Damichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Damichael, a surprisingly light day for you because of the weather. Hopefully everybody out there, which is 2/3 of the country, it sounds like, that has been impacted by this winter storm. Hopefully everybody's being safe. Grizzlies Nuggets was one of the games postponed by the NBA due to the weather conditions. Damichael, you're there on the ground in Memphis. Was that the right call?
Oh, it's definitely the right call. In fact, right before the game was postponed, I'd reached out to some people there just to tell them like I'm not coming. So even if they would have played, I wasn't going to be there. So that just tells you just how serious it was. I mean, I know people close to me like would drive a mile and need people to help them, and you had people saying things like, if you stop out here, you're toast. Like if your car stop, like if you stop, a stop sign or something like that, like your tires might be spinning. It was bad. It's bad. So yeah.
Yeah, Jeff Calkins posted a video of him driving in the storm, which don't be on your phone, Jeff Calkins. That's extremely unsafe while you're driving. But Jeff Calkins is also from Buffalo, if I'm not mistaken. So it's important to have that context, right? The Mid-South, folks in the South are not used to 20-degree temperatures and inches of ice. So I do think the Grizzlies made the right call. Kudos to the NBA and the Grizzlies organization. And we'll see, obviously we don't have a game to talk about on this edition of the show. We may not have one on tomorrow's show either, depending on if Memphis is even able to get to Houston. Maybe Damichael can have some insights into that by the end of the program here. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get 200 in bonus bets if you win. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. As proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, throw your ones up in the sky, the number one sports podcast network out there. Thanks for helping us be that. Whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, wherever you get a podcast, make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, and subscribing. Damichael, the Grizzlies did play a game on Friday, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because the Grizzlies lost a game on Friday to the New Orleans Pelicans, and it was once again a game that the Memphis Grizzlies should have won. Not only because the Pelicans are 11-36 on the season, 4-17 on the road. That in and of itself is kind of embarrassing for Memphis. But the reality is Memphis once again had a double-digit lead. Their largest lead in the contest was 13 points. The Grizzlies were up by, I believe, something like 9 or something like that, or 8, going into the final quarter itself. And then the Pelicans have a 40-26 fourth and pull away from Memphis late, a 133-127 defeat. There's lots of things that probably make up the answer here, Damichael. The fact that the Grizzlies defense struggled, especially in the second half. 40 points in a quarter is way too much, and to his credit, Tomas Isolo said that in his post-game availability. My biggest stat that I always talk about, turnovers. Memphis had 19 turnovers, 27 points conceded off of turnovers. There's lots of things that you can point at from that to points in the paint. Lots of spaces where the Grizzlies struggled against New Orleans, but it's becoming a more macro trend, right? Multiple games in the last several weeks that the Memphis Grizzlies have had double-digit leads and then blow them. Why is that?
I think there's a multitude of factors, that come into play with the Grizzlies not being able to hold leads. The number one factor is a league-wide factor, the fact that just the game is faster. There's more three-pointers, and, a 15-point lead is not what it used to be years ago. But at the end of the day, you could talk about that because that's what Isolo kind of talked about before he got into why the team is struggling to hold leads. This is more of a specific Grizzlies issue, too, because the Grizzlies are tied with I believe it's the Pacers and the Spurs, most blown double-digit leads in the NBA this season with 11. We've seen, I believe it's the last 6 games now, the Grizzlies have had double-digit leads in each of the last 6 games, and they're 2-4 in that stretch. So they're building leads pretty much against everyone, but holding them has become a problem. And the main thing that stands out to me And Isolo again has touched on this as well, is they just don't have closers. They don't have those bona fide closers on this roster. And really, especially when Ja's out, we saw, that game against Orlando. Ja really kind of was a big factor, and they built 33-point lead. And Orlando really, I think they got it down to 19 at the end of the second quarter, and then it was 19 at the end of the third quarter. I think Ja Morant played a big role in that. There was also the game against, I believe, the Hawks where Ja played. Clearly was a little limited, but they didn't close that one out after having a double-digit lead. So the thing is, the teams who are the best in the closing situations usually have a go-to guy, right? A closer. It's hard to really just run sets when you get to the end of the game, because most teams are switching everything. They got their best defenders in the game and players, and just naturally the energy, there's going to be an uptick. When you're in the first quarter, in the second quarter, maybe even in the third quarter, you're saving a little bit of energy for those last minutes of the game so you can go all out. And when defenses do that against the Grizzlies and they ramp up the pressure, there's not really a closer. Jaren Jackson Jr. is struggling in the clutch right now, and he's their go-to guy. That's the guy that they get the ball to in the clutch, and he's struggling. He has not this season been a player who's a go-to player that kind of thrives in that situation. So when you take that out of it, and then you look at the rest of the guys who are usually on the floor, Cam Spencer, Jalen Wells, Cedric Coward, they're mostly looking for open shots. And quite frankly, there's not too many open shots. They're going to be coming in clutch situations. If you get an open shot in the clutch, the team probably wants you to take that shot, the opposing team. So it's a roster, I think, issue as well. And look, the reason that I say that, because I know that a lot of people want to put this issue on Coach Tomas Isolo, and where you can place the blame on him. This is because it's a combination. Like I said, it's a multitude of things. Where you can place the blame on Isolo is the fact that when we're midway through the fourth quarter and the other team has its go-to guys in the game with 6, 7, 8 minutes left, the Grizzlies' go-to guys, Jaren, when he's available, they're coming out of the game so they can get back in the game with about 4 minutes left. And a lot of times we see that's when the opposing team makes sort of a run, and the Grizzlies is kind of in a catch-up position at that point. So that's one thing that stood out to me. But also going back to the issue with the roster, this isn't something that's just started this season. Pretty much throughout the Taylor Jenkins era, we talked about fourth quarter struggles with this team. And in part, it's because of the fact that, Ja has been really clutch at times over the course of his career, but the Grizzlies haven't been a great shooting team. They have not been just a great fourth quarter finishing team at any stretch of the last, 6 seasons.
And the fact that Ja has been very inconsistently available obviously has an impact on whether or not you can count on him to be there in those end of game scenarios. You hit the nail on the head what I was going to focus on. And I do think we have to continue to give the context of Isolo is not working with a full deck here, right? The roster is not healthy. It hasn't been healthy the entire season. It's hard to judge him without that health. But games are still being played. The ball is still being tipped off at half court. There's still a closing situation, and Isolo's rotations are maddening. I don't understand how in a sport like basketball, where I would say outside of baseball, the need to get into a rhythm, right? There's so much mechanical stability. There's so much to getting to your spot, finding your shooting stroke. That matters in the game of basketball, getting into a rhythm. And time again, whether it's Cam Spencer hitting a 3 or 2 threes in a row and then coming out of a TV timeout, who's on the bench? Cam Spencer. Or to your point, the Grizzlies.
We've seen that far too many times this year. Yeah.
Or the Grizzlies, to your point from earlier, 9 minutes or 7 minutes, whatever it is in the NBA. I always confuse it. But there's a TV timeout somewhere in there, like 3 or 4 minutes into the final frame. And coming out of that TV timeout, a lot of teams have their starters in for the duration of the fourth, but there's Jaren Jackson Jr. and Ja Morant sitting on the bench. You have to be more aware and malleable. And this was a critique of Taylor Jenkins that I had, that I think Tomas Isolo is repeating some of those mistakes. And again, Tomas Isolo has forgotten more about basketball than I'll ever know. But the reality of the situation is I can sit here and watch games after a lifetime in sports and understand that you oftentimes win more when you play your best players more. And you can make arguments for shorter bursts of rotations. You're 5th in the NBA in pace. There are 4 teams that play faster than you, and that's per Basketball Reference. There's 4 teams that play faster than you, Coach Isolo. I'm guessing their minute rotations are a little bit different than yours. So I think there has to be, unless we're tanking, which maybe we'll lean into a little bit more here in a moment with our Ja Morant trade conversation, unless they're approaching the tank, and I'll happily be the tank commander if we're choosing a direction. We'll close out the show with that. But it feels like that's what they're doing right now. They have these leads, they have these opportunities, and then they waste them away because they're playing guys more minutes than they should be playing. And we continue to tout having the highest scoring bench in the NBA. Context matters there. The bench in our team plays a lot more than other teams. How do you feel about that? Let us know on X, at Joe Mullinax, at Damichael C. Why do you think the Memphis Grizzlies struggle with keeping leads? When we come back here on the show, Ja Morant trade rumors continue to float. We'll get some updates on that, see where Damichael stands, if anything has changed. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. Shed a tear, one final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. Super Bowl 60 is almost upon us, and FanDuel is making sure that you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everybody's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you are a new customer to FanDuel, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season's over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Ja Morant continues to have his name floating around in trade rumors. Brandon Scoop B. Robinson posted this on X. New Orleans Pelicans were very aggressive in pursuit of Ja Morant. The package that was discussed, Jordan Poole and Dejounte Murray for Ja Morant and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Jordan Poole, Kevon Looney, Poole, Jordan Hawkins, Hunter Dickinson were also floated. The holdup, Memphis wants a first rounder, even if it was protected. The Pelicans said no. Now, whether that's accurate or not, and again, Scoop B, shout out to Scoop B. I think he does a pretty good job. We don't know if that's true, false. Damichael, that's your territory. And again, Scoop B has his sources. The point that we're doing here, even whether that trade offer is real or not, is it continues to float, right? Even in the wake of the Ja Morant elbow injury, that continues to be a question. So, Damichael, what are you hearing, if anything? Is there anything fresh to report along the lines of, whether it's that Pelicans trade or even just on a bigger, more macro view? Has the game changed 10 or so days away from the trade deadline, or are we pretty much right where we've been?
Yeah, shout out Scoop B. I met him before, really, really solid person. But yeah, as far as like where the Grizzlies stand in kind of the trade market for Ja, let's start here. The number one thing is, to my understanding, like at this point, the intentionality is still, what it's been over the course of this process. Now that's still that. And Joe, there's been a funny thing I've learned throughout this process. Apparently, when I say that the Grizzlies, are very, very interested in trading Ja Morant, people take that as I want Ja Morant gone. So, I'm learning things here through this process. Apparently,
I won't be built by association. In fairness to you, partner, I apologize for that. You've been hanging around me for too long.
Look, man, I'm learning to take the punches as they come. But getting back to the point here, I think the next thing here is, I think we got to this point where what's the value around Ja giving, the injury context. And, like I said a couple, episodes ago, like I feel like, that injury, we know it's a real injury. It's an injury that's going to keep him sidelined through, the trade deadline. If you were really just looking at this from the perspective of other GMs around the NBA, just use kind of a process of elimination type plan, with this thing. And you would say, okay, why would a contender take on Ja, given that he's going to be out beyond the trade deadline? When you make a trade deadline move, you at this point, you're sprinting to the finish line for the playoffs. You're making a move for the postseason. So it's like, okay, that probably eliminates most contenders if you look at it from that standpoint. So now I'm looking at it okay, now we're talking about a point guard here in Ja. Uh, Look at the Trey Young situation. Trey Young went somewhere where he could be what I call a stabilizer. He could be that point guard. You already got a couple pieces there, Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George. Now you got your point guard who can kind of stabilize things, and now you have a sense of direction where you can build in other areas. The team that comes to mind to me when you've taken those factors, a team we mentioned from the beginning, but not as much as some others, is probably Sacramento. Sacramento makes sense as a stabilizer. We know the contracts; they can make that work, whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think like a young player like Keegan Murray is someone that they really like out there. Ja, we know how much he values spacing. Playing with a guy like Keegan Murray would be very beneficial, to his style of play. And then we'll see, they have their own problems they got to figure out over there with what they want to do with Sabonis, DeMar DeRozan's contract, Zach LaVine's contract, etc. But that is one that I would keep an eye on, that location. And then, of course, I know we mentioned like Milwaukee earlier in the process, but now, just seeing how Milwaukee's season is going, like even though we were hearing that the interest, and Milwaukee's interest was there for sure. I'm having a hard time figuring out, why Milwaukee would do that at this point, given, the situation with Giannis being what it is. Given that they don't have, the most draft capital out there because of what they, when they acquired Damian Lillard and things like that. So here's where it is to me. I still think, in the Grizzlies' hopes, we could say like that, they would still be able to trade Ja Morant. But I think as the days go on, it's becoming harder to see a path into where that's going to happen before the trade deadline.
Obviously, if you wait until the end of the season and you have the availability of roster spots and salary cap and all those sorts of things with the NBA offseason that provides, it makes more logical sense that it would occur then. But we've heard so much about the urgency of trying to move on in the here and now. And that is what kind of leads me to believe that the Grizzlies, depending on what the return is, obviously that matters a lot. I don't know that the New Orleans package would do it for me, right? And if that's the best that the Grizzlies can do, again, per Scoop B's report, we don't know if that's true or not. But if that were true, hypothetically speaking, at least, I don't know that fans would be excited about that. I posted about something on X along those lines, and a lot of folks, got in my mentions and said how crazy I was to say that I understood why Memphis would want a first, and I understood why New Orleans would say no. The Grizzlies value Ja Morant more than anybody else in the National Basketball Association values Ja Morant. And people can yell and scream at the clouds, get mad at me if they want. That's just reality. If you look at the NBA from the 30-team view, you have to have that idea of this guy has played 79 games in almost 3 complete seasons. Why would you give up so much in terms of salary cap space, in terms of potential draft capital, a prospect that you drafted, that you're invested in, all of that to bring on somebody that even when he's on the court, and he is spectacular still when he's on the court. He showed that in London. He shows that in flashes every once in a while, but the key phrase there is every once in a while. So yeah, I think that you're onto something that it's just going to continue to get harder as the days approach to find somebody that's desperate enough. I do think the difference with Milwaukee is that they're desperate to make Giannis happy every chance they get. But the injury to Giannis gives them an opening to say, if he's out for the next month and a half, what good does it do us to go get Ja Morant now, right? I think that that's a logical argument to make. So I guess my concern, Damichael, is what happens if he is still on this roster? Are they able to reconcile? Maybe that's a topic for another podcast, but that seems more likely today than it was a week or so ago.
Yeah, and that's something we actually, it kind of goes hand in hand with what we're going to talk about a little bit in the next segment. So, yeah, that's a thing. And yeah, there have been a lot of like trade rumors, reports out there. And, some of the stuff, that I've seen, I just say is not true. And that's why I know people are kind of, thirsting for information right now. And I have people sometimes saying, hey, Damichael, what's the latest? What's the latest? It's like this thing doesn't move the way that I think some people think it does because you see a report here, then you see a report there, and you see a report there. And like a lot of times, or sometimes, all of that stuff is just not always accurate. So that's kind of the situation when it comes to like just all these rumor mill trade reports and things like that. But yeah, at the end of the day, the Ja situation, like I say, it remains very fluid. And you're right. It's definitely going to be a point of conversation that's not going to end February 5th. I think some people in the fan base have the idea that if Ja's not traded February 5th, they can celebrate and they can relax. And look, I promise I'm not trying to be the Debbie Downer. I'm just keeping it real. That's what I've always done. And sometimes people like it when you keep it real and sometimes people don't. But February 5th won't be some type of ending to this process. I can pretty much guarantee you that. If Ja isn't traded at that point, then I'm sure there's going to be another point of contention from the standpoint of, all right, the end of the season and the off season, we'll probably be having these conversations again.
Hit us up on X at Damichael C at Joe Mullinax. Let us know in the comments on YouTube. How are you feeling about the Ja Morant situation heading into the final countdown over the next week and a half or so as the trade deadline approaches? Speaking of the trade deadline approaching, Damichael Cole, we are basically at it, and we want to give you a free month of our new Everydayer Club to help get you ready. If you need a group chat to keep up with the chaos, join ours. The Everydayer Club gets you access to a group chat on Discord just for Grizzlies fans, plus national chats where you can hang out with fans from around the league. Make sure that you're hanging out in there. I'm going to continue to do my best. I'm old. I'm washed. Not really a Discord guy, I'll be honest. Every once in a while, I just forget Discord's there, but I'm going to set little alarms for myself. Go get in the Discord, hang out with folks. There's lots of opportunity for us to interact there. You also get ad-free versions of this show, and if you sign up by the trade deadline on February 5th, you can use the code DEADLINE to get your first month free. Again, DEADLINE to get your first month free. That's the code. Tap the link in the show notes to learn more, and you can also go to this URL, lockedongrizzlies.supercast.com. Hang out with us as a member of the Everydayer Club. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena, the crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part hasn't always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, with the fans. I love seeing the all-in price up front. There's no surprise fees at checkout. What you think you're paying is what you are going to pay. And being able to see the view from the seat before making the purchase makes a decision even easier to make. Plus, there's great last-minute options, too, with NBA tickets showing up at solid prices. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not gametime.com. Gametime.co. Check them out now. All right, Damichael, we'll close out this edition of the show. I am a writer on the side, right? I used to be a writer full-time, or not full-time, but more writer than podcaster. And then the last few years with Locked On, that shifted a little bit. It's taking me a few years, but I'm,
You still got your fastball, as the baseball people say. You still got your fastball. I read you. Oh,
Joe. Thank you. The Memphis Grizzlies are stuck. That is the article that I wrote over at On SI. Go check it out if you haven't done so yet. Sounds like we're having a little success with it, which is good. And I enjoy writing. That's why I still do it. Whether there's money, no money, I just like to write. And that's what I've done about the Grizzlies since 2013. So thanks to the On SI, Ethan, and all the folks over there that gave me that opportunity. I wrote about how I believe they're stuck. Because of the Ja Morant injury, because of the uncertainty around all of these injuries, the Grizzlies are arguably in the worst place you could possibly be in the NBA, directionless. There is no title contention. I hung out with our good friend Jackson over at Locked On Rockets for their episode coming up to preview the game if it happens on Monday. And the reality is he was complaining about their head coach, Ime Udoka, and how I hate how they struggle offensively. I was like, dude, you've got Kevin Durant. Like, you're clearly trying to compete for a championship. You have a direction. Maybe you'll fall short of that goal in the era of the Thunder, but at least you're trying. I don't know what the Grizzlies are doing. So if they traded Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, John Conchar, and a first-round pick for a starting caliber wing to put next to Cedric Howard and Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey moving forward, I would applaud that trade because at least there's a direction. Or if they chose to move on from Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. and went scorched earth and they decided to tank and try. This draft is looking generational, Damichael. We had 3 freshmen, I think it was Saturday night, scored 40 or more points.
I watched them all.
One basketball game. I mean, there's a big game, I believe, coming up in the next week or so.
Next Saturday. I'm tuned into that one too.
BYU
number 1 and number 2. Top 2
picks. The 2 best players in the country are showing off. So I think there's an argument for saying, you know what? This ain't working. And you pulled the trigger on that. The in-between, when you are outside of the play-in, we can't even celebrate having a chance to be the 9 or the 10 seed right now for the Memphis Grizzlies. Yeah. They are the 12th seed. So why wouldn't you make a choice? Either you're pursuing that, and again, that may not be what I would do. It may not be what Damichael Cole would do, but at least they're making a choice. Go pursue, okay, we want to be a play-in team. Cool. It probably means you keep Ja Morant. Definitely means you keep Jaren Jackson Jr. You upgrade your starting lineup. Maybe you play your best players more. Who knows? And you move forward. Or you stay with this vision and you believe in Cedric Howard and Zach Edey and you start a rebuild process. I think there's logic behind that too. I struggle with the in-between. I feel that the Grizzlies are stuck. Damichael Cole, what say you?
Yeah, I felt that way for a couple years now. And it's been mainly because of the injuries. You know, I always go back to the 2023-2024 season. That's just always going to be the pivotal moment of this era to me, because that was when, you know, they felt like, oh, we made the subtle movements that's going to take us to the next level. We took Dylan Brooks off the team. We got Marcus Smart, who was 2 years removed from winning Defensive Player of the Year. At the time, we were talking about how the Grizzlies had the last 2 Defensive Player of the Years. Remember, Jaren had won it that season,
up about that.
And Marcus won it the year before. So it was the fact that, oh, you're going to have Dez, you're going to have Ja, you're going to have Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson Jr., and then Steven Adams will get back. That was the point. At that time, it's like, oh, Steven Adams is going to go the non-surgical route in the offseason. He'll be back start of the next season. That didn't happen. You know, Steven Adams got the surgery, never played another regular season game with the Grizzlies. Marcus Smart played here a season and a half and didn't play on the floor a lot. Ja Morant played 9 games that 2023-24 season. Dez was out a lot. I think he had a toe injury that year. Jaren played the most of that group. But, you know, Jaren had some money, you know, on these last couple years. But anyways, yeah, they're stuck. They are stuck. And the question is, how do you get out of this? You know, if you're like, there's people that have been stuck in Memphis right now trying to drive around here. And look, you can't just hit the gas button. You just can't, you know, press the gas pedal and you're just going to get out of it. It's really not that simple. You're going to need some help. Like the Grizzlies are going to need some help. And you got to find a way. You know, it might be going backwards, it might be going forward, but here's kind of where, you know, I stand. You have Zach Edey, who I think is a core piece. We'll see, you know, how this injury stuff shakes out, but that's a core piece. Cedric Howard, that's a core piece to me. Jalen Wells has been a little bit more up and down, and you can figure out what you're going to do with Jaren and Ja, particularly those guys, but there's 2 directions you can go. If you want to say, hey, look, we want to keep Ja and Jaren. We want to keep, you know, Zach Edey and Cedric Howard. You got 4 guys. That 5th starter needs to be a little bit more of a difference maker than Jalen Wells. This is in my opinion. If you're aiming for a championship level, that 5th starter needs to be a guard who can get you 20-plus points a game, and he has a little wiggle room. And clearly they want it to be someone who can, you know, handle his own on the defensive end a little bit more than like Desmond Bane was, you know, at his time in Memphis. So, look, how can they acquire that with the assets that they have? They have the assets to do it. Whether it's the draft capital, whether it's the contracts, trust me, Joe Mullinax over there, he might be salivating while I'm saying this because he knows they have the contracts. But it's a situation where when I say the Grizzlies are stuck, it's not like they're stuck from the standpoint of there's no way out. They're stuck from the standpoint of they need to figure out which way they can go. Because, you know, if we use what we know, like at this point, again, it's hard to see Ja as a long-term piece here, just based off of what we know. And again, there was once upon a time, Kobe Bryant wanted to leave the Lakers. And they worked that out and lived happily ever after. Can't rule anything out. So if somehow, some way, the Grizzlies' Ja get on one accord and you figure that out, there's an easier, plausible route to matching some contracts and getting another player on the wing that can be a bona fide difference maker. And then boom, that speeds up the process a little bit faster. The longer process, which I think Joe was alluded to on his X account the other day when he was like, blow this thing up and whatnot. The longer process.
I was very sad.
Yeah,
I was very sad.
I know, Joe. I know that was an emotional moment for you. But that's where I go back to the Zach Edey and Cedric Howard. You say, okay, look, we got 2 core pieces here. Jaren's going to net us something nice. You move off of Ja's contract and you basically say, let's go find our superstar in the draft. Let me tell you right now, it's about 7 names that I got in mind that look, if you land in that top 7, top 8, if you land 10, you better do your best to move up, because it's about 7 names right now that look like they can be difference makers coming into the league. So, I mean, this is the draft class, and we'll talk more about this draft class probably right after the trade deadline. We figure out, the direction of the Grizzlies a little bit more. But yeah, so I say they're stuck. But there's reasons and ways to go each route.
Imagine if the Grizzlies do choose to blow it up and they land a top 5 pick and Boozer from Duke is there at 5 or 4. And now you've got Cameron Boozer next to Zach Edey for the next half decade at least. That would be a wonderful pairing. And again, Jaren, in theory, next to Zach Edey is a wonderful pairing. But you don't
I tell you what, we wouldn't be talking about rebounding with that Boozer.
No, that would not be a problem. That's exactly right.
Him and Zach on the boards. Don't you?
To your point, there's literally 7 guys. At the very least 5. But I agree with your 7, and we'll talk more about that as the time comes, that you're looking at potential superstars. And the Grizzlies have draft capital in this draft to potentially move up and be in that conversation, especially if their own pick is that much worse. But again, Malik Monk is sitting there in Sacramento, just like there, right? And in terms of scoring, in terms of getting a bucket, somebody that in theory can close out a basketball game for you.
He can do it.
He can do it. And I'm not sure Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and a future couple of second-round picks or a protected first down the road. Why would Sacramento say no? They're getting draft assets. It frees up their money in the long term. I think there's optionality there. So they literally, and that's just one example. We probably could do another episode about lots of different other ideas.
Oh, we will. We'll get into it.
If they choose to go the more aggressive route, which again, I would be fine with, genuinely. It may not be what I would do, but choose a path. Make a choice. The in-between, the 2 timelines idea, that ain't working. It hasn't worked for some time. You're either in with this group or you're not, at least to me. That is it for this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. We appreciate you guys for being here with us. Damichael, the next time that we come on these Locked On waves, are we going to have a game to talk about or what? Like, as of this recording, do the Grizzlies have a path to Houston? What are we doing here?
Yeah, we'll figure it out, I guess. I mean, we'll see. I don't know, but I'm sure by the time this recording hits the airways, we'll definitely have more clarity on that situation.
Well, hopefully we have a little more direction and the Grizzlies don't get stuck on an airline somewhere. That would be a disaster. Make sure you're subscribing, following Locked On Grizzlies so you get all the latest episodes. Make sure you're following Damichael on X at Damichael C. Follow me on X at Joe Mullinax. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Grizzlies ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedongrizzlies.supercast.com. That's lockedongrizzlies.supercast.com. Hang out there. Make sure you're joining the club. For those of you on video, we'll be sending you to the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. On audio, make sure you're making your second listen NBA game night on Locked On NBA. For Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. Thanks so much for being with us on this edition of the show. We'll catch you next time. Stay warm, stay safe out there, most importantly, and make sure you're staying locked in with us here at Locked On Grizzlies. See ya.